Today we are going to talk about ancestral veneration and creating an ancestral altar. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what ancestral veneration is, why do we do it, and then give you suggestions on how to build your own ancestral altar. I'm going to include some tips and some things to keep in mind, as well as suggestions on how to maintain your altar, as well as the types of things that you can give to your ancestors as a form of veneration. So, what exactly is ancestral veneration? Where veneration is another word for reverence or even just giving gratitude. And it's actually quite common in many cultures to include the dead in part of our daily and living lives. The dead are never dead as long as they are alive and well in our hearts and in our voices. And so, one of the reasons that we venerate our ancestors is a form of keeping them alive, of sharing their stories with the current and contemporary generations. We speak their names aloud because they are important to our lives and they will continue to be. And it's very common to have altars in our home for our ancestors or for the dead and the deceased. Sometimes we do these things and we don't even realize that that's what we're doing. So if you've ever had someone pass away and you may put a picture of them up or light a candle, or if you are feeling sad or down and you might, sit at the side of your bed and maybe call out a deceased loved one's name or just find yourself talking to them even though they're not there. Those are all forms of communicating with your ancestors. So when we create an altar is basically a dedicated place in your home that you go to do all of these things. So while your ancestors and your family and your loved ones are always around you and always surrounding you, this is a place for you to create for them that they know this place is for you. I did this for you. I'm going to come here to connect with you. You're special and this is especially for you. So the three reasons that we have an ancestral altar is to give gratitude. We want to give thanks to our ancestors for all that they did for us. We don't just want to go to our ancestral altars when we're down or when we're blue or when we need something. We want to include them in the happy and joyous moments in our life as well. So we have an ancestral altar to give gratitude. This is also number two, a dedicated place where we can sit and talk and pray and ask for support and guidance and protection with our ancestors. And lastly, like I said, to be in joy, to celebrate, to help our ancestral spirit still feel a part of the living contemporary family. Let's get into actually creating your ancestral altar. Now, anyone can have an ancestral altar in their home. It is not for any specific race or culture. If this is something that you are feeling guided to do, especially because you may be hearing the call of your ancestors to do so, you can do it. I'm going to give you some guidance on maybe some basic necessities that are important for any ancestral altar, but it's really up to you to create something that really honors your family and your lineage and something that you know your ancestors would be proud of. But before we get into actually building the altar, let's talk about a little bit of pre-work. So when you create an ancestral altar, you definitely want to have pictures of the deceased people in your family. So you want to start by gathering pictures of both your maternal or mother side of the family as well as your paternal or father side of the family, people who are deceased. As you're collecting these pictures, you do not want to have people who are still alive in the pictures. So for instance, if your grandmother has passed away and you have a beautiful picture of you and her together, you do not want to include that picture on your altar. Why? Because you're still alive. You're not deceased. You're not your own ancestor. So you want to look for pictures of deceased people and only deceased people. Now, it could be a group of deceased people. So, if you have your grandmother and great grandmother and your great great grandmother all in one picture together and they have all crossed over, that would be a beautiful picture to have on your altar. However, don't be stressed out if you don't have pictures of everyone that you want to include. That's okay. The second thing that you want to do is you want to create a list of names. So similarly, we want to break things up into maternal side and paternal side of the family. You can have them on the same altar, but you want to be able to call out each side of your lineage separately. Traditionally, especially in African cultures, it says that you want to be able to go back 7 generations. 7 generations is a lot. So don't necessarily stress yourself out if you can't go back that far, but do try to go back as far as you can. So what you would want to do is get a piece of paper, and you would want to, like I said, split it down the middle. And on one side, you'll start with your maternal side of the family, and you would write the deceased people's names down in order of maybe most recently deceased to the ones that have been deceased the longest. Okay, and you want to write their full names as possible, their government first and last names. If you want to include a nickname, if you want to include, granny or grandma or pawpaw or TT or something, you can do that, but make sure that if you do know their first and last names, you want to call them by their first and last names. Okay. And then you would do the same thing for your paternal side of the family. Some people say if you are a woman, then you need to start with your mother. And if you're a man, you need to start with your father's side of the family. That is totally up to you. I don't think that there's going to be anything necessarily wrong with doing it any type of way that you want to do. So once you have a list of your maternal and your paternal side of the family, it's also a good practice to write down anything that you know about that person, anything that they liked. Why? Because your ancestral altar is a place of celebration. So if you knew, like, your great great grandmother made an awesome apple pie, she won awards for it, and people couldn't get enough, you would write that down. The maker of delicious apple pies. If your great grandfather helped build a skyscraper in your city, or was a part of city planning, you would write something down about maybe him being a great planner or organizer, or he knew how to work with his hands to build and create. Because again, we want to keep the stories about our ancestors alive. So as much as possible, try to write down something that you knew. Personally, I've collected a lot of old obituaries. It's something really easy to do if you're visiting, family members' houses, because people tend to keep them, and they always list things about the family members in the obituary, right? So you could just go through obituaries to give you an idea of who these family members were, especially if you didn't have a close relationship with them, or they passed away when you were younger, or you may have not known them at all. You just write down a little bit about each of those people so that you know the energy of what they were good at and why you're connecting with them. Now, there are some ancestors that we don't venerate, and then every member of your family that passed away is not an ancestor. So let's talk a little bit about that. So we don't venerate or uplift family members who were not necessarily upright people when they were alive. So it's not about being judgmental and looking at people for making mistakes, but traditionally we don't necessarily venerate people who maybe did bad things, such as like murder and rape people. Also, when children die young, they are not our ancestors. While they are a part of our family, they are not considered our ancestors. So as you are writing out your list of honorable, that's what you want to think of. You want to venerate your honorable ancestors. You do not include children who died young, and you do not include people who, just did not do very good moral things. Why? Well, basically, you don't want to go to the spirit of these people and ask them for protection and to uplift you, because they were not able to necessarily do that in their physical form when they were here. So they may not have the energy and the power to bless you with those things, and that's okay. So what you do want to do in those cases is just pray for peace for those ancestors that may have not been very upright, okay? But you definitely don't want to include them as people that you're going to venerate and uplift on your altar. Now you have a little bit of pre-homework. You're going to gather the pictures of your ancestors and your family members that you can find. You also are going to, the real homework is going to be writing down this list, and if possible, finding a little bit of information about everyone. If you can't find information, don't stress. This can be a living, breathing document, meaning you can come back and write things in as you go, but at least just have a good framework. So now it's time to actually build the altar. So here are some things that you can include on your altar. I'm going to give you suggestions and then tell you a little bit of why. So I'm going to start with the must-have things, and it's not going to be a lot of must-have things, but these are the things that you must have, and feel free to let your intuition and your guidance guide you to what else you need to put on your altar. The first thing you need is a piece of white cloth. You want something that's clean and pristine, nothing dirty and dingy. You can go to a fabric store and get an inexpensive piece of fabric or a very elaborate piece of fabric. It's all up to you. You can cut up a white sheet or use a pillowcase. It's really up to you, but you definitely want to have white. White is the color of purity, right? And so you want to have a piece of pure white, unblemished cloth for your altar. Next must have for your altar is going to be water. Water is very important, and you want to always make sure if you have nothing else on your ancestral altar that you have water. You want to have clean water, which means every few days you want to change the water out. Water is a conduit. It's a connection between yourself and your spirit in the spirit realm. So you want to make sure you have fresh, clean water on your altar. So those are the two must-haves on your altar. Everything else that you're going to have is really just up to you. We talked about having that list of your maternal and your paternal family. You definitely also want to have that on there. I'm going to go ahead and add that to the must-haves. So must-haves is going to be the list of your ancestors, a white cloth, and fresh water. So those are the must-haves. Now, if you can find pictures, you definitely want to include some pictures. Like I said, the pictures should only have deceased relatives and family members, no living, and you can include them. You can arrange them in any type of way that you want to. Give libation. A libation is just alcohol. You can use, so when you give offerings, and so now I'm talking about offerings, but when you give offerings, you want to give offerings to your ancestors of things that they would enjoy. Okay, let me say it one more time. You want to give offerings of things that they would enjoy and things that were important to them. So if your ancestors liked to drink, then give them alcohol, but specifically give them the alcohol that they liked. If they like gin, give them gin. If they like whiskey, give them whiskey. It's not for you, it's for them. You may be totally against smoking, but if your ancestors enjoyed a good cigar or a cigarette, go ahead and put a cigar or a cigarette on that altar in honor of Great Aunt Kathy and Uncle Todd. If that's what they were into, you go ahead and you give it to them. So your offerings are going to be things that are important to them. We often give our ancestors food. So you can definitely cook food and make a small plate and give it to them. But simply, fresh fruit, fresh hand fruit is totally an appropriate offering for your ancestors. You do want to make sure you take off any of these little grocery store tags and give them, again, fresh fruit and things that they would enjoy. Candy, desserts, again, anything that your ancestors would enjoy would be considered an offering. When you do this, it's really important to also have a schedule. Traditionally, every 3 to 4 days, you want to refresh your altar. So you want to make sure to change out your water, throw away any food that's old, moldy, or rotten. You may want to, if you're going to have alcohol, then replenish the alcohol. Whatever it is, you just want to make sure to have a pattern to do this regularly. Okay, so you're going to put things on the altar that really resonate with your ancestors and have a regular time to go and talk to them. Often, when you refresh your altar, that's also going to be a good time for you to talk to your ancestors. It doesn't have to be the only time you talk to them, but it is a good time to say, just here, giving thanks, giving gratitude. I appreciate all of the things that you have done for me. You can also talk about any problems or issues that you need help, support, or clarity around. And then even if you want to tell them why you're giving them the offerings that you're giving them. If you're telling them you're giving them apple pie in honor of the stellar apple pie that so-and-so made, you can say that. But it really is just to connect this to keep this connection between you feeling nourished, abundant, and having all of your needs met, because that's really what it is. You feed your ancestors because your ancestors fed you. They're feeding you from the spirit world with support, with love, with information, and so you are now also feeding them the things that they would enjoy. If you want to turn on some music and dance and party with your ancestors, do that, especially if that was something that they were really into. My family loved to have a good time. Every weekend at my great grandparents' house, there was like a party almost all weekend, and it was just literally a party of family. We would eat, the older people would drink, the little kids would play games, and we would get money and go to the store and get ice creams until our stomachs hurt. It was fun every weekend. So whenever I really want to celebrate with my family, I just throw a little party for them. Turn on some music, definitely get some libation pouring, and talk to them and celebrate with them. Even when great things happen in my life that I want to be like, oh my God, this is a win. The same way where I may have wanted to go to my grandmother's house or something like that to tell her about it, I'll just throw a little party at my ancestral altar to let them know, like, thank you for the blessings. Look what I've done. Let's celebrate. So this isn't just about mourning and being sad. This is about uplifting, being in joy, and including them in your life. So this is what I got to get you guys started with your ancestral altar. I hope this helps.